Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anisha Patel, leading the research and legal action and law for Palestine. And on behalf of the State of Palestine, the Republic of Colombia, the Independent Commission for Human Rights in Palestine, and Law for Palestine, I would like to warmly welcome you to our side event this afternoon, From Impunity to Accountability, the role of ASP member states in supporting the ICC's response to the situation in Palestine. It has been more than 14 months since the start of the ongoing genocidal assault against the Palestinian people in Gaza, the most violent manifestation of the Nakba, a 76-year-long settler colonial process, which has inflicted atrocities upon the Palestinian people across the geography and in the diaspora. Over the past year, the ICJ has issued 3 preliminary measures orders in the South Africa versus Israel case and an order in the Nicaragua versus Germany case. There has been a momentous advisory opinion in July 2024 that deemed the presence of Israel unlawful in the occupied Palestinian territory, tantamount to aggression. But here, at the ICC, the situation in Palestine remains one of the most formidable challenges in the history of the court. Since June 2014, the period under the court's jurisdiction, the grave violations across Palestine, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, have been met with pervasive impunity. However, on 21 November 2024, the pretrial chamber took a historic and decisive step by rejecting Israeli objections on jurisdiction and admissibility, issuing arrest warrants against the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister, Gallant. These warrants came 6 months after the prosecutor's request and represent a significant advancement on the long road towards justice and accountability for the Palestinian people. This critical step, however, has been taken in the face of mounting political pressures and threats directed at the prosecutor, the court itself, and the staff. Given these pressures and the ICC's limited enforcement mechanisms, the onus now is on states to ensure the court's orders are respected and its mandate to end impunity is robustly supported. To have this conversation, today we have with us this distinguished panel of experts who will take us through different aspects related to the arrest warrants in the situation in Palestine and the ICC, the broader implications of these arrest warrants for third states, and how all of this will affect the international legal order as it is. To begin with, I would first like to invite Ambassador Ammar Hijazi, the Palestinian representative to the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the permanent representative of Palestine to the international organizations in The Hague. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate Law for Palestine for organizing this very important event and all the co-sponsors of the event, and thank you for inviting us to speak. Well, I have written my comments, and please keep track of time. Don't feel shy to stop me if I go over time, so that we don't take so much time in order to hear the experts with us today. But talking about the responsibilities of states, it is important for us to understand that this is a watershed moment that we are living. But allow me first to refer to certain senator who will remain unnamed in this conversation. He was very honest, a US senator. He was very honest when he said that International Criminal Court was not designed for the US, the UK, France, or other Western states. That's why, according to the senator, Western democracies should not be subject to the rules of the court. They are beyond the arm of accountability and international justice. The senator unfortunately speaks for a lot of politicians who may be hesitant or ashamed to say that they believe this out loud. But the truth is the case of Palestine has brought us to this moment of truth, and states have come to choose which side they are on. This is the most important choice they will make in modern history, because there are those who want to say the international system was designed not to have everyone equal under the law, not to make sure that human rights are truly universal. It was just a novel way of repackaging colonialism and hegemony with a lot of sugarcoating. Now that this sugarcoat has been worn off and exposed, we don't have to pretend anymore. That's a choice they can make. The question is whether humanity is willing to allow that choice to dictate our future. Are there enough states willing to openly adopt this colonial, hegemonic, racist outlook on international politics and international justice? That's a question for those states to answer. And they cannot dance around the subject or around the issue. They cannot pretend that there are different perspectives or gray areas. There aren't any gray areas. States either stand with the law or not. You either respect what the court decides or you do not. There are no exceptions unless they are stated in the law. There are no criminals exempt from accountability, and certainly there are no crimes that have an excuse. This is not Palestine issue, and I know we have been saying this for some time now, but I think it is important to continue saying that this moment is not just about Palestine. It is true that Palestine basically is the catalyst for this moment, but it continues. But if countries dodge their responsibilities and abandon their obligations towards Palestine case, then they've done that on all other fronts, and this will have a catastrophic domino effect on all issues, on war crimes, crimes against humanity, and every other aspect of this legal effort. Each state must own up to its responsibilities on every aspect of the conduct. They can't now claim that there's a little dark corner that allows them to hide and say, this doesn't apply to me. I know in diplomatic circles, we tend to speak in diplomatic terms, but I believe that this is not the moment to sugarcoat or to make things appear nicer than they are. And we must have the moral courage to take a stand and to, at least for future generations, to know where each and every state stood and what parties did in this moment. Certainly we in Palestine, we will not stop seeking accountability. This is not just an obligation. It is our moral and historic responsibility. We will not allow the genocide and erasure and annihilation of our people to go unpunished. This is not something that you can brush under the rug. This is not something that you can forget. You do not forget or forgive. You seek accountability because justice is the only way that Palestine can heal and that Israel can recover from being a brutal colonial apartheid state. There are real issues involved in this. This is not about principles. The safety and well-being of the officers and judges of this court are at stake because everybody involved in this and these issues are being intimidated, pursued, spied on, and even threatened. And we must understand this very well. This is not a secret, but it is important for us to highlight it at every chance. Not standing up for the court endangers the people, not just the international system. We must understand that as states parties, our responsibilities are not rhetorical or expendable, just as the lives and dignities of the victims knocking at the door are not. The court must be empowered to stay relevant and independent It must be able to hold all war criminals to account, no ifs, no buts, and no exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. This is not a Palestine issue. This is more than that, and that's why I have the honor of inviting Ambassador Juan Jose Quintana, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Colombian Mission in New York, to make his opening remarks. Ambassador, I'm saying this incorrectly. Quintano is also the chair of the Working Group on Amendments of the New York Working Group of the ASP and the agent before the ICJ in the request for intervention in the South Africa versus Israel genocide case. Ambassador.
Thank you, Anisha, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm very honored to be here. The government of Colombia is very pleased to co-sponsor this event, and I want to make just a short opening remarks on the importance of this topic. The topic of the panel can better be formulated as a question: what is the role of ASP member states in supporting the ICC's action? What can states do? And I don't have an answer for that. What I have is the certainty, a profound conviction that something must be done, that the passivity, the inaction of the international community in front of this carnage cannot continue as such. It simply cannot. All wars have costs, and all wars produce suffering in people, but this is a genocidal war. There is certainty of that. The reports out there, Madame Albanese's latest report is really chilling reading. There can be no doubt that genocide is being committed, and there is strong evidence that war crimes are being committed, crimes against humanity are being committed, and the international community just cannot stand idle and do nothing. What we feel in New York in certain circles is an overwhelming sense of impotence, that the international community is really not well equipped to confront these situations. And just last week, you will remember there was a draft resolution at the Security Council which did very little. The language in the resolution didn't say anything that had not been said before. It called for a ceasefire, for the release of hostages, for talks, for humanitarian assistance and access, and yet it was 14 votes in favor against 1 by a permanent member, and it was vetoed. The veto was about language. The problem of the US with the resolution was about the order of some sentences in one paragraph. And because of that, there was no resolution. So on one plate, you have more than 40,000 people dead. On the other, you have a discussion about semantics, inaction by the Security Council on the basis of a drafting problem. This is really, really incredible. Now, the veto, of course, triggered a special session of the General Assembly, which is taking place this very week. There are big speeches there, emotional speeches, but very little else. I'm not saying that nothing is being done at the political level. At the JA, there are a lot of things going on. But you feel that the states, individual states, are doing very, very little in front of this terrible situation. One last thought that I wanted to share with you is connected with the South Africa versus Israel case that Anisha mentioned. South Africa did something very interesting in its application. In order to establish a standing before the court, South Africa advanced 2 propositions. One is based on the idea of obligations erga omnes partes. That is very familiar in the case law of the court. But the other one was more original, was something to do with the duty of prevention, the duty to prevent genocide under the Genocide Convention. This idea was later abandoned, and the court didn't mention it in the orders and provisional measures. But it's a very interesting concept, complicated legally, but politically very strong. What South Africa said was something like, we are a party to the Genocide Convention, so we are bound by the convention to do everything in order to prevent genocide. When we have credible information that genocide is being committed and we fail to act, we will be in breach of the convention. So my application, my bringing Israel before the ICJ, is my action in order to prevent genocide. Legally, it's complicated because that amounts to saying that the 190-some states parties are in breach of the convention by not suing Israel. But apart from that, politically and morally, that's a very strong idea that every state in the world, party to the Genocide Convention, has a duty, a legal duty, to do everything in its power to prevent genocide. That is not being done. So there is an idea there that violating the Genocide Convention or the duty to prevent is not to be taken lightly. I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we will definitely build on that idea in the panel of how those two components are connected, the ICC and the work of the ICJ. Next, we have remarks from Dr. Ammar Dwaik, who is the Director General of the Independent Commission for Human Rights in Palestine, the national human rights body.
Thank you, Anisha. Dear ambassadors, distinguished representatives, esteemed colleagues, and friends, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at this critical side event. Today, I speak not only on behalf of the Palestinian Independent Commission for Human Rights, but also for the countless victims whose suffering demands our immediate attention and action. Most of us welcomed the ICC's issuance of arrest warrants as a historic step forward. For victims who have endured unimaginable suffering, the decision is more than a legal milestone. It is a glimmer of hope that their voices are finally being heard and their pain acknowledged. Yet, as we celebrate this progress, we must confront an unsettling reality. Powerful forces are actively working to undermine the court's credibility and mandate. And as Ambassador Hijazi mentioned, this is not about Palestine. It's about the collapse of the very framework of international justice. We call on the ICC, particularly the Office of the Prosecutor, to broaden its scope of investigation and accountability. War crimes and crimes against humanity in Palestine are not new. They predate October 7, 2023, and fall squarely within the court's temporal jurisdiction, which extends back to 2014. Justice must address the entirety of those violations and truly serve the victims. In March this year, Law for Palestine, with the ICHR support and the collaboration of 16 national human rights institutions and 6 bar associations, submitted a robust legal document to the prosecutor's office calling for the prosecution of the crime of genocide. The evidence is overwhelming. Amnesty's report released yesterday just reinforces our findings. Moreover, justice must reach further to hold more Israeli officials accountable and dismantle the systems that allow these crimes to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event is above all a platform for victims. ICHR has collected over 1,000 testimonies from survivors, witnesses, and victims in Gaza. These accounts document atrocities, including, among other things, torture, sexual torture, the use of human shields, extrajudicial killings, forced displacement, starvation, targeting journalists and medical staff, the systematic undermining of the rule of law, and even measures aimed at birth prevention. The courage of those who came forward, often at a great personal risk, is deeply humbling. They have entrusted us with their stories and ask us, will anyone listen? Will anyone act? I leave the answer to you. I also wish to honor my colleagues in Gaza who risked their lives to collect evidence even as they became victims themselves. All our offices in Gaza have been destroyed. All our colleagues have been displaced. One of our colleagues, he lost the entire of his family, 3 generations, in an Israeli attack. Their resilience and commitment to justice inspires us all. This is a moment to reaffirm that the ICC is not merely a judicial institution, but a symbol for hope for victims around the world. We must work collectively to strengthen its ability to deliver justice, mobilizing political diplomatic support, and ensuring the effective enforcement of its decisions. Thank you for your dedication to this vital cause. Let us proceed with urgency and resolve, knowing that history will judge us not by our words, but by our actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dwaik. Our next speaker is Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati, a Palestinian surgeon and head of the Burns and Plastic Surgery Department at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, and he will be joining us via Zoom, presenting his testimony with a particular focus on targeting medical personnel and infrastructure, as well as the types of injuries that he has witnessed while he was there.
Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. My name is Ahmed Mokhallalati. I'm plastic and reconstructive surgeon. I relocated from London to Gaza in February 2023, where I started as the chief of a plastic surgery in Al-Shifa Hospital. I stayed in Al-Shifa Hospital during the first siege till the last day, and then I moved to the south during the second day of the ceasefire, 25th of November 2023, as the hospital was non-functional. Then I moved to the European Gaza Hospital, where I worked till February. Then I had to go and leave to see the family, and I injured my thumb while working to get some treatment. And then I returned back in March with one of the international organizations, as anyone Palestinian was not allowed to get in, especially if you hold another passport. In June, I was kind of forced to leave because of the regulations of the organization. I had to leave through Jordan. They gave me a hard time. And they, after 4 hours of arresting me, they said, you are not allowed to come back to Gaza anymore. That's briefly like more than 8 months of the wartime in Gaza. So during Shifa time and the first attacks, the kind of injuries we were seeing, especially the burn ones. So in the usual wars in Gaza and in the conventional weapons they use, usually you don't get a lot of burns with these weapons. For example, compared to 2014, the 53 days, they had only 7 patients admitted as burns to the hospital, while in the first 3 weeks alone, we had more than 90 patients with extensive burn, mainly more than 30% burn. So the weapons they use, which is 10% of the patients we reviewed in the hospital, the patients we reviewed were really big number of patients with burn element. The weapons are having a lot of a flame and high temperature, causing most of the time that most of the tissue will go. Many patients, we have seen them with the bone coming out of their bodies, all the skin, muscles, and the tissues have gone. This kind of injuries will end up with patient in a critical care needing ICUs, needing a lot of operations and a lot of critical care support, which we lack because of the big number of patients. So we had to triple the capacity of the hospital to adapt these patients. ICU beds used to be 20 in Al-Shifa. We extended that to 70. And then we came to a moment there where we realized that we can't afford any treatment in a proper way. We have created the black area where any patient with extensive burn, because of the resources we have, we can't treat them. We couldn't afford them with the treatment. That was a sad decision, but that was the only way to deal with the very limited resources. We had no resources because the borders were closed. Any MOH vehicle which tried to go to the store and to get some supplies from the stores of the Ministry of Health were targeted. The people felt unsafe going to the stores, except for the ones very near to the hospital. And we had incidents where they have targeted on their own. So we ended up with many patients. And I think 80% of these patients, we lost them definitely because we were unable to treat them. So the amount of patients, the lack of resources was ending up with any patient surviving the first attack will die because of the complications of burn. During the siege and attack on Al-Shifa Hospital, which started in November 2023, it was more than 2 weeks of the Israeli soldiers occupying and controlling the area around the hospital. Then they got into the hospital. They targeted the hospital in all aspects. They pushed the people to leave. And you can imagine that many patients had to leave. Not many, there are like 1,800 patients had to leave the hospital without ambulances, without care, without anything provided, because they were really worried about this one. They were totally controlling the hospital. They arrested us, they interrogated us. They threatened me personally by killing my family. And the officer was telling me, we knew that your family survived the bombing on your in-law house, and they just came alive from under the rubble. Next time we'll get them. And that was the moment where I realized it's really like risky. And I asked my family to leave Gaza as I was under the siege in Al-Shifa Hospital. So I was lucky having other passport to support me, but the people of Gaza, they have no other places to leave to. After checking all the hospital, making sure there was no one with gun in the hospital, they were never shot or received any resistance within the hospital, and they were moving freely in all the hospital wards, rooms, and everything. Despite all of this thing, 24th of November was the ceasefire time. The night before that, the engineering department of the Israeli occupation forces came to the hospital, and they made sure that they bombed every critical facility of the hospital. They have bombed the 2 oxygen stations we have, the generator, the electricity control room. To alleviate, they used vacuum bombs, and they destroyed it fully, so it will never function again. And they destroyed the telecommunication room as well as the water supplies. So any critical, and lifts of the hospital, definitely. So any critical facility of the hospital was targeted, so the hospital will never function. Why did they do this if they were sure that there was nothing inside? So they claimed they found 5 people, they arrested them. But even with this thing, with this fact, they still destroyed the facilities of the hospital. What I just wanted to say, we lost many of the patients because for these 2 weeks, we had no oxygen at all. We lost 70 patients in the ICUs. We started the attack on the hospital on the 10th of November with 70 patients in the ICU. I evacuated the last patients from the ICU on the 23rd of November. We had only 2 patients in the ICU survive these attacks. So it was kind of leaving the hospital with even not the very basic and limited resources. Let me conclude with something. I think it's all the world responsibility to stop this genocide and to account them responsible for what they have done. Because if they continue doing this one, I'm sure that the next attack or like any war happening will start from this end point. The amount of attacks on the health system, the amount of the brutal attacks and genocide happening is something unbelievable, attacking the medical field, the medical hospitals, the medical personnel, and they still feel that they have the freedom to do this. So I hope we can reach a point where they will be all accountable for these attacks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for your work and for your intervention. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Shantal Milone, who is an associate professor of international criminal law in the University of Milan, a legal representative of victims of Gaza at the ICC, and a senior legal advisor for the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. She will be speaking with us today on the need to expand the arrest warrants, both in terms of crimes and individuals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very honored to be on this panel today. In January 2009, the government of Palestine lodged a declaration under Article 12.3 of the Rome Statute accepting the jurisdiction of the court ad hoc. This was done in the wake of what was called Operation Kazled on Gaza. You might remember those terrible weeks at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, which sparkled already at the time huge, I would say, criticism and were considered to be unprecedented in terms of the destruction inflicted on the civilian population of Gaza, on the civilian structure, the alleged unlawful use of white phosphorus on the people of Gaza. And there was a committee that had been established by the UN that was led by Justice Richard Goldstone, which in a very detailed report already in 2009 concluded that many war crimes had been committed in Gaza and also the crime against humanity of persecution. Since then, Palestinian civil society organizations, human rights defenders, lawyers representing the victims in Palestine have been engaging with the International Criminal Court. And over the years, we had to face mountains of obstacles. And these mountains of obstacles had to be overcome in order to arrive till November 2024 with the issuance of the warrants of arrest. And it's impossible now to go through all what happened in these 15 years, but just a few milestones just to follow. 2012, the General Assembly in November upgraded the status of Palestine, which in turn made it possible for the State of Palestine in January 2015 to ratify the Rome Statute and also accept the jurisdiction of the court retroactively till 2014. And then in 2019, the closing of the investigation by the former prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, but at the same time requesting the pretrial chamber to assess the jurisdiction of the court, which was contested with regard to Israeli and what was the territory of Palestine. This decision came in 2021, and then the opening of the investigation finally, and then a big gap until October 2023, where, of course, with the 7th of October, it was impossible for the prosecutor not to deal with the situation anymore. So over these years, we have seen an escalation of violence, a deterioration of the situation in Palestine, both, of course, in the West Bank, including Jerusalem, and in Gaza, attack after attack, till the point which I don't even want to use adjectives to describe that we are facing today in Gaza. So when the warrants of arrest finally came through now on 21st November 2024, of course, the question that many of us had and are voicing in these days is, well, is this the end now of the story, or is it the beginning of it? And Raji Sourani put it in this way in a conversation with the Office of the Prosecutor, and the prosecutor himself reassured us that this is not the end, this is just the beginning. And so in these few minutes, I would like to make the point that indeed this needs to be just the beginning of a story that has already, as I said, many, many years behind, but of course will take also many, many years to continue and needs to continue in front of the ICC in the first place, but not only. There are many other courts that should and hopefully will be involved. So my point is that both in terms of the charges, what are the crimes that are included in these investigations, and in terms of who are the individuals, the suspects that are interested by these charges, we need to see an expansion. With regard to the first point, it's very good to see that the charges have been issued by the pretrial chamber and first of all requested by the prosecutor, not only with regard to war crimes. And this has been always a very important point for Palestinian human rights organizations, victims, and everyone defending their rights, that this situation doesn't have to be seen only from the lenses of a war, not just IHL, not just in terms of proportionality or, armed conflict, let's say, narrative. And that's why the presence of crimes against humanity in these charges that have been now included in the warrants of arrest is particularly important. And I want to just pick one, which is persecution, and persecution which is potentially encompassing many, many years of conducts of the Israeli army and state in the occupied Palestinian territory, in particular in Gaza, but of course not only, where each and every human right of the Palestinian population, civilians, has been violated with a discriminatory intent because of their belonging to the group. So this is, of course, very important and reassuring. At the same time, there are many crimes that are not included. And just to go back a few years ago, when Fatou Bensouda, the former prosecutor, closed her investigation in the situation, and she issued at the time a report that was summarizing the results of this long investigation, she had included not only the offensive 2014 in Gaza, but also the settlements. And of course, the settlements are only getting worse in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem, of course, included. But also the Great March of Return. I don't know how many of you remember that in 2018. So these allegations, these many generations of victims of crimes, in a few years, we could go back, of course, to the beginning, right, to 48, and we could go back to 67. But I'm just framing now the discourse in terms of what is the court's jurisdiction. So this last, or at least the court's involvement. So at least since 2014, the beginning of the jurisdiction in temporal terms of the ICC, we have seen in these 10 years a stratification year after year of victims. And it's absolutely necessary that those who were already dealing with the court, we have power of attorneys for hundreds and thousands of victims back in 2014, are not forgotten. Only yesterday, just yesterday, I mean, Amnesty International released this groundbreaking report on genocide. And here, yesterday was the global launch of this report with, in 300 pages, details in the greatest legal possible accurate analysis why what's going on in Gaza since October 2023 can and shall and should be called genocide. So, of course, this is another level that we are now facing, another even in a sense overwhelming charge that we believe should and I think we believe will be added into the investigation. But let's remember apartheid, where Palestinian human rights organizations, in the first place Al-Haq, but of course not only, documented over the years, and Palestinians have been talking about apartheid that has been imposed on them since decades of this system of institutionalized discrimination for the sake of maintaining oppression on a people. And finally, in the last years, we had seen also major human rights organizations like Amnesty International, again, like Human Rights Watch, like Israeli also organization, B'Tselem, that made the apartheid narrative their own. So my point is, again, to conclude, this is definitely not the end of the story in terms of charges, but also in terms of individual responsibilities. We have seen now two Israeli, the prime minister, of course, and the former minister of defense, object targeted by these charges. But what about the head of the Kogat? What about the head of the Southern Command of the Israeli military division? What about the chief of staff of the Israeli army? What about the military intelligence chief? Minister Ben-Gvir, Minister Smotrich, who called in these very months for the total extermination and destroyment of Gaza, and who are working relentlessly to advance the settlements and the annexation of the Palestinian territory. So, to conclude, we hope that this investigation will continue. We are aware that the prosecutor cannot do everything at once, and the court cannot do everything at once. So, of course, there is a need to advance step by step, and we praise the court for its work recently, and we are determined and think that the legal discourse needs now to continue and to advance in this direction. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Our next speaker for the day is Kenneth Roth. Kenneth is a visiting professor at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs and has nearly for 3 decades served as the executive director of Human Rights Watch. He will be addressing the necessity for states to execute arrest warrants and uphold the ICC's mandate in order to preserve the larger international legal order. Kenneth, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much for holding this tremendously important meeting and for inviting me to participate. What I'd like to do is address, some of the elements of the duty of the 124 member states of the ICC to execute arrest warrants. And what I thought it would be useful to do is to look at the recent challenges to what should be a straightforward proposition on the part of various governments that are trying to create an Israel exception to the Rome Statute. And there are different techniques asserted in this process, but they're all part of a very similar pattern. And so what I'll focus on in my brief comments is, first of all, the challenges to the issuance of arrest warrants. Secondly, the threats not to execute them. And finally, the threats to retaliate against senior ICC officials. Now, first, with respect to challenges to the issuance of the arrest warrants, I think you know that various governments, most notably Germany, but also Israel, tried to argue that it was inappropriate for the pretrial chamber to uphold the prosecutor's request for arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. And they put forward, in essence, 2 arguments. One was that Palestine is not enough of a state to have ratified the Rome Statute, even though now 2 pretrial chambers have rejected that claim. Even though the UN General Assembly voted 138-9 to recognize Palestine as a non-member observer state, even though 146 of the 193 UN member states have formally recognized Palestine. And in fact, the only reason we're even having this conversation, the only reason that Palestine is not a full-fledged state is because, first of all, of the US veto in the Security Council, but second, of course, because of the Israeli occupation. And here, the recent International Court of Justice ruling in the advisory opinion case is useful to consider because it says that no one should give legal effect to the occupation. And another way to understand that is nobody should deny Palestinian statehood just because Israel is physically occupying the territory of that state. So I think that this argument that Palestine is not enough of a state has now been pretty clearly disposed of. The other argument was one based on the principle of complementarity, which is, of course, the principle in the Rome Statute that says that the ICC has secondary jurisdiction. The primary jurisdiction goes to national courts insofar as they are exercising the duty conscientiously to investigate and prosecute offenses under the Rome Statute. Now, Israel foremost challenged this, but so did Germany, even though, there is no public investigation announced in Israel into the essence of the ICC charges, the starvation strategy that Netanyahu and Gallant have been pursuing in Gaza. Even though there was actually never a formal request by Israel to defer the ICC investigation, because to do that, it would have had to point to its own genuine national investigation, of which there is none. In fact, Germany took it a step further and said that, there should not be even insistence on investigating itself during a war. We should wait till the end of the war, which is a proposition that would be laughed out of court by most military lawyers, but also was not even the position of Germany when it came to the charges against Vladimir Putin, which of course were in the middle of the Ukraine conflict. So, of course, the second ICC pretrial chamber rejected that argument too. And I should note that even Germany, an ICC architect really, which played a key role in Rome, has not denied now its duty to arrest Netanyahu or Gallant should they dare to show up in Germany. Now, once the warrants were issued, France, most notably, has come forth and suggested in somewhat convoluted language that maybe it's not required to execute those arrest warrants. Of course, Hungary and others have done this, but France is the government that we would not expect to do this. The French government alluded to the International Court of Justice so-called arrest warrants cases coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which had ruled in a decision that, frankly, is very contested, that heads of state or government or a foreign minister cannot be arrested while they are occupying their office because of the need to fulfill the function of that office, to represent their state. But there were important caveats to that ruling. First of all, it spoke only to national courts exercising universal jurisdiction. And second, it explicitly said not international courts. And of course, the ICC is an international court. I mean, indeed, the Rome Statute says it rejects immunity for any official. And so there really is no legal basis for this French position, which is, I think, why it is written in such, ambiguous language. It was pretty obvious that President Macron was simply rewarding Netanyahu for having agreed to the ceasefire in Lebanon. And when that statement was met with widespread condemnation, France even backed off and said, well, it'd be up to the courts to decide. Of course, the courts would be much more likely to rely on the law than Macron did, and it's pretty clear that Netanyahu is not going to be visiting France anytime in the near future. Now, the final threat in this pattern is one represented by President-elect Trump. You all remember that, the last time he was in office, he imposed sanctions on Fatou Bensouda, the prior ICC prosecutor, and her deputy, because she had the audacity to open up investigations in Palestine and Afghanistan. These sanctions reflected the view that the ICC is not for Western countries that don't join the court, a view that the United States advanced vigorously in Rome, the human rights community fought, and the US lost. Indeed, I have a book coming out describing this in considerable detail in February. Now, those sanctions, Bensouda couldn't even take money out of her bank account, combined with threats from Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, against Bensouda and her family, showed the lengths to which the US and Israel were willing to go to prevent Israel from being subject to the international rule of law. And I have to say that Fatou Bensouda showed remarkable forbearance in just sort of grinning and bearing it and moving forward. Now, today, of course, the Afghan investigation is no longer an issue because Karim Khan has said that going forward, he will prioritize offenses by the Taliban and the Islamic State. So the fact that the Bush-era torturers might have been implicated in an Afghanistan investigation is no longer on the table. And indeed, for a while, the US government, in fact, even US Republicans had warned toward the ICC because of the charges against Putin. Even, a leading Republican senator like Lindsey Graham had said that changed everything. We support the ICC now. But of course, then the arrest warrants came for Netanyahu and Gallant. And the new Senate Majority Leader who will take over in January, John Thune, has already threatened new sanctions against Karim Khan and possibly other officials of the court. And Trump may well do it again. So I think the question before us is, what might impede Trump from this blatant interference with an independent international institution of justice? And there are a few things that come to mind. I mean, first, obviously, governments, including those represented around the room today, should press him, and insist that the rule of law is for everybody. It is not ruled by the superpower. It is not exemption for the superpower's friends. It is the rule of law. That's what it means. Now, Trump may not listen, but there are tools that he may be more inclined to listen to. The prosecutor is obviously aware that the Rome Statute includes an offense for obstruction of the administration of justice, in essence, for retaliating against an official of the court on account of the duties performed by that or another official. That would describe to a T what the imposition of sanctions for these arrest warrants would imply. Now, Bensouda could have charged that earlier and never did. I hope that Karim Khan will be more vigorous in applying that provision of the Rome Statute should Trump have the audacity to renew his sanctions. The other thing to keep in mind is the fact that Trump could be vulnerable to charges of aiding and abetting war crimes. Now, this is something that obviously Biden could have been charged with already by continuing to arm and fund the Israeli military as it was bombing and starving Palestinian civilians in Gaza. There was forbearance there again. But if Trump, it has the audacity to impose sanctions, I hope Karim Khan will stop this self-restraint and recognize that, if the war crimes continue, if Trump continues to arm and aid them, then he should be treated the same way that the Special Court for Sierra Leone treated former Liberian President Charles Taylor, who today is serving a 50-year prison sentence in Britain for aiding and abetting war crimes by the rebel force in Sierra Leone by providing them with arms. That precedent would speak directly to Trump. Now, I think we're all aware that Trump has already threatened that all hell will pay if the hostages are not released. He probably means something that he will retaliate against Hamas, not that he's going to pressure Netanyahu. But, many people have asked, well, what more could Trump do given, the horror that Israel has already visited upon Palestinian civilians in Gaza? And sadly, there is something that we can think of if we listen to the far-right members of Netanyahu's government, and that is Israel could still proceed with its blatant plans for mass forced deportation of 2 million Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt, even though that's the last thing Egypt wants. I think we have to be aware of this possibility, and that would be a massive war crime that Trump would absolutely deserve to be charged with for aiding and abetting if he continues the funding, as well as the Israeli officials who would be responsible for that. Now, Trump may slough that off, but he cannot pardon himself for an ICC arrest warrant. And, more important, he will suddenly not be able to travel to 124 member states. And that, will be something. Governments, of course, will be reluctant to arrest the president of the United States, but more likely they will just tell him not to show up because that would be inconsistent with their obligations under the Rome Statute. So, this would be a significant penalty, a significant assertion of the rule of law, which is important to do if Trump goes so far as to impose sanctions on the court. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. I feel like this is a conversation that we can have for much longer about what the possibilities of pushing back against the restraints on the court can be. Our next speaker for today is Hassan Ben Imran, my distinguished colleague at Law for Palestine. He's a governing council member there, and he's also a PhD scholar at the Irish Centre for Human Rights at the University of Galway. Hassan will be speaking about addressing the crime of genocide and the importance of its inclusion in the investigation in the situation of Palestine.
Thank you, Anisha, and good afternoon, everybody. Before I start talking about the very specific topic that Anisha just mentioned, I want to start with a broader introduction. And Anisha, of course, will make sure to remind me of the time, please. Earlier I think by the end of 2023, there was a phone call between Netanyahu and Biden, the outgoing American president, where Netanyahu quoted or cited Dresden as well as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what the United States did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to justify what's happening in Gaza. Biden, his argument was mainly that these indiscriminate attacks are costing us, are causing you PR damage, and they are causing us by association, so you should reduce them. And the Netanyahu's response was that you did it once to sort out your problems, so why can't we do this? There is a theory in psychology called imitation theory, where human mimicry, like we imitate each other, that exists within the international legal system. In short, the point in short is violation inspires violation, thuggery inspires thuggery. If it like the Gaza genocide is referred to as the only live broadcast genocide on earth, because now we have social media, and I'm telling you, this is the first live broadcast genocide, not the only. Because if this doesn't stop, if the perpetrators do not pay for something that we have seen live, people burning, babies burning alive, we have seen it live on TV around the safe zones in Gaza. If that doesn't stop and the perpetrators go unpunished, this is the first, not the only, but live broadcast genocide on earth. So this is about Gaza. This is about the victims of Gaza, but also this is about our universe. Like we're trying to save what could be saved of these institutions and of the future of humanity in general. Moving on to my topic, the specific one. So basically, I'm talking about that the Office of the Prosecutor, or like the member states of the Assembly of State Parties of the ICC, are supposed to support the inclusion of genocide in the arrest warrants application, whether through referrals, such as the referral that we had earlier from South Africa, from Colombia, from other countries, to the ICC prosecutor to include the crime of genocide together with the other crimes, or in terms of endorsement of these arrest warrants and support of the mandate of the investigation. This inclusion is quite necessary, first of all, because it's genocide. Like, we see that what's happening right now on the ground, with the intent that was yesterday, Agnes Kalamard detailed, it went into details to speak about the specific intent that was established in the Amnesty report. In Law for Palestine, we collected 500 plus statements of genocide. And we don't need the specific statements per se. We can rely on the patterns of conduct, as I will come to later on. The other point about genocide, why genocide should be included, is that most of the ASP member states are actually member states to the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention, if you recall the title, all of them. Thank you for the correction. All of them. And if you recall the title of the Genocide Convention, it has the word prevention. So it's punishment and prevention of genocide. So what's the point of adding the word prevention if we are just waiting for the genocide to finish, then trying out the legal venues that exist? We just wait for the people to die. We wait for the whole situation to settle, and maybe these leaders to step down from their offices so they become prosecutable. The point is prevention. And as once one genocide scholar said it, if you're confused whether it is genocide or not, that means maybe there is some prevention efforts taking place. But now we're establishing that this is genocide. So we can see that we are late in prevention, but it's not over. The genocide is still ongoing. So prevention is at least to stop it until this point. Prevention entails different sets of duties. Prevention is not simply just stating that this ceasefire is necessary and then continuing daily life, business as usual, as they say it. Nothing changes. That's not prevention. That's simply trying to escape the moral as well as the legal obligation to prevent, or at least prevention is like what South Africa did in the application before the ICJ. That's an attempt for prevention. Prevention is like what Colombia did. Prevention is like what the countries that acted within the means at their own disposal to stop this genocide, or like to add the pressure further to stop this genocide. So having the ICC prosecutor add the charge of genocide, the charges of genocide to the mandate of the arrest warrants would further add to the pressure to prevent this genocide, which is already happening, which is already prosecutable as genocide, but to stop it at a certain point. Besides that, it is the jurisprudence of this court that we are at a stage where genocide could be included. You might be familiar with the Bashir case in 2009, when the prosecutor applied for arrest warrants under the charges of crimes against humanity, genocide, as well as war crimes. The pretrial chamber then approved only war crimes and crimes against humanity. So the prosecutor appealed for the exclusion of genocide from the arrest warrants. The chamber said at that time that there was no specific intent, and they referred to the threshold of the only reasonable conclusion to be drawn, if I'm not mistaken. Let me not... the only conclusion to be drawn, or the only reasonable inference. That was the threshold that the pretrial chamber wanted to establish the specific intent. The prosecutor appealed, and he won the appeal. Basically, the appeal chamber confirmed his appeal that no, at the pretrial stage, you just need to establish that it is one of the conclusions to be drawn. It has to be one of the inferences that this is a specific intent for genocide. It does not have to be the only one. This is the trial stage conclusion. At least that was the deliberation in the Bashir case. And hence, the genocide charges were added to the arrest warrants in the case of President al-Bashir. Right now, we're talking about hundreds of statements of intent for Netanyahu, Gallant, thank you, for Netanyahu, for Gallant, for Ben Gvir, for Smotrich, for Halevi, for the Air Force commanders, as like very clear statements from the president himself, Herzog. We have the patterns of conduct. In Law for Palestine, we submitted earlier, together with the ICHR, a long detailed communication to the ICC, fully focusing on intent. And we did not just rely on the 500 statements we collected. We focused as well on the patterns of conduct that were followed and that were established as well in the cases of ICTY, that were considered the safe zones, the movement of people in a way that leads to their destruction, the medical destruction, so on and so forth. The employment of the human shields argument to dehumanize the whole population of Gaza, the ecocidal and the democidal practices, destroying the environmental crimes in Gaza, as well as the massive destruction of properties and household in Gaza. I mean, why would you destroy that if you are only targeting a military objective and you want people to come back to their ordinary life after the military operation is over? No, there was a clear pattern of conduct for this genocide in a way to make Gaza impossible to live in, uninhabitable anymore. And this can be inferred, or at least can be one of the conclusions to be drawn for the intent, the specific intent of genocide, as was the case in al-Bashir. If there was an exception I can't per se see the difference why this can be excluded from the other charges. And not only Netanyahu, this includes many others as well within the Israeli cabinet. Besides that, the UNITAD, for instance, the UNITAD is the UN Committee on Iraq, and I'm concluding with these 2 points, which was then headed by the current sitting ICC prosecutor, established that the ISIS group, the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, has perpetrated genocide against the Yazidis, quoting the ideology of ISIS, which was targeting the Yazidis, was aimed at eliminating the Yazidis. Ideology then was used as a proof for the specific intent, at least according to the UNITAD report. That was somehow indirectly referred to in other cases, in the Nimahana case, if I'm pronouncing it, in Nahimana case, in the ICTR, as well as in Karadzic, in ICTY, where the ideology, the extremist ideology, was referred to as to establish the specific intent for genocide or for criminal intent in general. So Netanyahu is publicly a follower of Jabotinsky. Google Jabotinsky and revisionist Zionism to know what revisionist Zionism talks about. With that, I'm concluding. It is absolutely one of the conclusions to be drawn, if not that. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, Hassan, but I take the liberty for you being my colleague to ask you to keep to the time. Sorry. Our final speaker for this afternoon is Dr. Giulia Pinzauti, Assistant Professor of Public International Law at Leiden University and an expert in international criminal law and international tribunals. She will be addressing state responsibility in light of the arrest warrants, including questions of jurisdiction, admissibility, immunity, and what comes next following the Israeli appeal to the arrest warrants.
Thank you, Anisha, for having me as part of this discussion. In the short time that I have, I want to reassure you that I will only be making 2 points. First, that states have to comply with judicial decisions. They cannot pick and choose what decisions they comply with, depending on political expediency. And second, that in international law, states are the lawmakers, not the judges, not the ICC, not even the ICJ, but states. And states can shape the development of international law. So please bear with me as I take you through these 2 points. Starting with the first one, state parties to the Rome Statute have an obligation to cooperate with the court and should do so. Cooperation with the ICC, I want to emphasize, is a judicial process. It's not a political issue. And I'm glad to see that France has come around on this. The competent authorities of the state parties to the Rome Statute do not review or even confirm the arrest warrants, which have been issued by independent and impartial judges on the basis of evidence and law, but simply execute them. And now we come to the much debated question of immunity of foreign officials of third-party states in particular. And if I may slightly reframe the issue or actually add a little bit of nuance, the question is not whether foreign officials enjoy immunity before the ICC, because the answer to that question is a very straightforward no. Look at Article 27 of the Rome Statute. To me, the question is whether those foreign officials enjoy immunity from arrest by other states acting upon the court's request. And that's a slightly different question that concerns horizontal relations between states. And I can see that this is a difficult and sensitive issue, that states face competing obligations, or at least perceive that they're facing competing obligations, and that the law on this is somewhat in flux. The ICC, I'm sorry to say, has issued a series of inconsistent decisions, first in relation to state parties' obligation to arrest Sudan's President al-Bashir, and now with regards to Putin. Why do I say this? Because the appeals chamber in the Jordan decision in 2019 concerning al-Bashir seemed to have settled the issue by saying that under customary international law, heads of states have no immunity from criminal prosecution before international criminal courts, and somehow this extends to immunity from arrest by state parties to the ICC. Now the pre-trial chamber in the Mongolia decision seems to have followed a slightly different line of reasoning, holding that obligations under the Rome Statute supersede those that apply in the horizontal relations between states, including with states that are not parties to the statute. As we all know, after the issuance of the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, states have positioned themselves with regards to the issue, sometimes taking a position that is inconsistent with their reaction to the issuance of arrest warrants, for example, with regards to Vladimir Putin. So how do we go forward? How can we help state parties to the Rome Statute to make the right decision? And here I want to emphasize that state parties have to comply with judicial decisions. As I said before, they cannot pick and choose what decisions they comply with depending on political alliances, because this really undermines the credibility of the system. And second, as I said before, in international law, states are the lawmakers, and they can shape the developments in the law by positioning themselves with respect to these issues. For example, the Dutch foreign minister stated that the Netherlands will arrest the suspects if they enter Dutch soil, and other states followed suit. These are very important statements because they reinforce the view that is gaining ground that foreign officials, even of non-party states, do not enjoy immunity from arrest. Another option that I just want to put on the table would be for state parties to adopt clear and unambiguous cooperation laws with the ICC, stating that foreign officials do not enjoy immunity from arrest. And this is what happened, for example, in South Africa. Yes, South Africa did not at the time arrest President al-Bashir when he was attending an African Union summit, but the issue went before South African courts that stated quite clearly that under domestic law, South African authorities had the obligation to arrest President Bashir. So laws of this kind, if adopted, would also contribute to generate practice. And it wouldn't be the first time that a state or certain actors within a state act inconsistently with customary international law in order to set a precedent for the progressive development of the law. And the example that comes to mind is the one of the Italian Constitutional Court, my own country. A few years ago, the Constitutional Court issued a very bold decision in which it held that the customary rule on immunity from jurisdiction of foreign states is in conflict with fundamental principles of the right to remedy, right of access to justice for victims, and decided to give priority to the protection of fundamental rights. And while doing so, it really advocated for a shift in the custom and wanted to set a precedent. Now, I'm aware that this is a different context concerning the immunity of states in civil cases, not the immunity of state officials in criminal cases. But the point that I'm trying to make is that domestic courts can really play a pivotal role in shaping the law, and that time will tell the direction in which we're going. So to conclude, we talked about states' obligations with respect to the arrest warrants, but I just want to emphasize the point that has already been made, that states have wider obligations with respect to what is going on right now in Palestine, irrespective of the ICC, the arrest warrants, and irrespective of whether a state is a party to the Rome Statute or not. States have the obligations to prevent genocide has been mentioned, and to ensure respect for the Geneva Conventions. Let's not forget the very fundamental obligations as well. And we don't have to wait, 4 or 5 years until the ICJ has issued its ruling on the merits. We don't have to wait until the genocide is completed. You have to act now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giulia, and thank you for keeping to the time. We still have about 15 minutes to take on some questions. So if you have some questions for the panel, I would request you to mention your name and affiliation and put your question forward. And if it's directed to someone specific, then if you could mention that too, it would be great.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the speakers for the rich presentations. My name is Hamdi Shakoura, and I'm Deputy Director for the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. My organization is based in Gaza. Myself, I am based in Gaza. I live and work in Gaza. I managed to leave the Strip almost 9 weeks after the start of the attack. I do not consider myself an eyewitness per se, because what I have seen, whatever horrific in the first 2 months, is not compared by any dimension by later development. However, as early as the first week, it was evident, not only for myself, for my colleague, for human rights defenders, for human rights organizations, and for the entire Gaza population, that the war is nothing but a war on civilians. This is the early account, the early conclusion of the first attacks. Why? Because we witnessed the airstrike, the early attacks with 2,000-pound bombs in one strike, with multi-layers of attacks on residential areas, attacks on infrastructure, schools, hospitals, universities. The list continue on all levels. So the attack was aimed at the destruction of Palestinians. So it was clear to us that it was a genocide. Now we are talking about 14 months after the genocide, and yet we are discussing and debating whether it is a genocide or not. What is needed is to stop this carnage, to stop this slaughtering of civilians, mostly children and women. The warrant of arrest, yes, we call for the expansion of the scope of the crimes. Yes, of course. Not only to include the genocide, but we're talking about history of war crimes and the crimes against the humanity in the entire OPT, in the entire city, Palestine. So it's a request to the Office of the Prosecutor to expand the scope. But let me say it frankly, if you ask me 10 years ago whether a warrant of arrest against a prime minister of Israel would have been possible, I think no. Nobody could, having chronically failed to hold any officer, even a soldier, an Israeli soldier, accountable, neither in Israel nor abroad. So for us, it's been very much frustration. So with this chronic culture of impunity, never, at least myself, my organization, we never imagined that this could have happened. But we never lost the hope. All of us, we worked relentlessly to fight this culture of impunity. And finally, it paid off. Now we have a warrant of arrest. Again, we never lost hope. I will refer to Ambassador Hijazi's start quoting a USM senator on how the court or the ICC was not designed for Americans or Europeans. I would say also that the court is not designed for Palestinians per se. Rather, it is together with other international accountability mechanism provide a window of hope for millions of people across the globe who've been deprived justice in their home countries. So when it comes to Palestine, Palestinians are not exempted from this inclusion. Second, the case on Palestine, the situation of Palestine, I believe is a test case either to push for more accountability, more strength to international law and to international accountability mechanism, or to go for lawlessness. And we will never lose hope in international law. This is the only thing that we will fight, and we will seek justice through. Thank you. I missed the question for all of you. Sorry for that. Having seen soon after the warrant of arrest many negative positions from different countries, mainly France and Netherlands and many others, I would ask, what is the responsibility of member state, of state party to the Rome statutes against a defiant state? What can be done? Because implementing the ruling is not a voluntary action, but rather it's a legal obligation to signatories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can look around if there are more questions. Okay, we have one there and then one in the back. All right, we can gather them and then get started. Please.
Thank you very much for this really important panel. I have two quick questions. One of them for Shantal Milone. Thanks a lot for pronouncing the report of Goldstone. Do you think if in that time, 2009, if the report was really brought out to the Security Council, maybe in the future we wasn't obliged to have many, let's say, sessions, resolutions, and especially the Israeli attack? And my other question to Mr. Hijazi, thank you very much for your intervention. I would like to know what's now the role of the PA, after all these, let's say, reports in which they consider the occupation is illegal, and as well the reports of other international organizations in which they work hardly and they declare that what's happened in Gaza is genocide. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Hall, for everything that was really interesting. So I have two questions. So it has been said that the crimes against administration for justice could maybe be used against the Trump administration. And I was just curious to know about the competency of the court. Would it be the same basis as for the current investigation against Israeli officials, or would it be another basis to to have these crimes against administration for justice against the Trump administration? And I have a second question. So this morning I was attending an event about universal jurisdiction, and I was curious to know whether you think that universal jurisdiction could be used in order to prosecute these officials that have not been targeted by the arrest warrants and maybe file cases in individual countries against these officials, because given that we have Palestinian diaspora against the words, maybe this diaspora could file on the basis of universal jurisdiction. Thank you.
Let's cover. All right. Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question relating to the responsibilities of states. I think it's very clearly said in the panel what are the responsibilities of states. But what can be done against obstinate states and those states who will not cooperate with the court? And there are several examples that already have been, the court has dealt with, including the most recent, the one related to Mongolia. So there is the legal process by which the court will take action against those states who do not comply. But we also witnessed that states were very active in certain instances, for example, the Bashir instance, whereby it had ramifications on the diplomatic relations with certain states were affected. So states unilaterally can take actions, and it depends. But we have seen that member states and, internationally, there is so much reluctance to take actions already against the crimes that Israel is violating, let alone to hold a state that does not detain or execute the court orders accountable. It is a long path, but we certainly will be naming and shaming. We will take each and every route possible that will make sure that those states will uphold their responsibilities as member states as per the Rome Statute in this regard. But also to work very closely with the judiciary in these states to make sure that also they uphold their responsibilities. Because again, the executive can sometimes say things just out of convenience. Like in this state, we have a head of the biggest party who is, I think now or next week, will be visiting Israel and will meet Netanyahu and will do certain things that are not aligned with his country's own position in relation to Netanyahu and his actions. But nonetheless, I think these things will not go unnoticed. It will expose the double standards. It will show that they are not in compliance with international obligations. And we are now exploring the venues that can also hold these officials accountable as we move forward. I will leave others to add to my answer. In relation to the government of the state of Palestine, and the PA is not the one representing Palestine in these instances, because the PA is only administrative body in occupied Palestinian territory. We will continue to do what we're doing, uphold our people's rights, fight for these rights at each and every front. We have chosen the peaceful path, knowing that we are entitled to armed struggle as a people, but we know that nobody will avail us or allow us to function under that right. So therefore, we have been taking the route of international legitimacy, and I think it has exposed the weaknesses in this international system, but also it had brought us steps closer to our independence. Yes, the price we are paying now is very heavy. Yes, the price that our parents, our grandparents have paid are extremely heavy. The miseries that our people have witnessed in the past 100 years with the British occupation followed by the Israeli occupation has been very, very, very high. And we have never seen accountability at any level, in spite of our cause being rooted in the international system and the UN that decided to partition our land and to create two entities. But the same countries that voted in favor of this partition resolution still deny the Palestinian people their right, including their right to recognition. One word on Goldstone. Goldstone was not adopted. In 2009, there was an attempt to weaken it, but since that day onward, it has been expressed and adopted by the General Assembly. It's not the Security Council, but the General Assembly that adopts usually the reports of the Human Rights Council. But put aside Goldstone, what about all the other reports that came before Goldstone and all other small responsibilities, including within the context of the peaceful process? We have never seen Israel being held to account at any level. So this is a chronic problem, as has been mentioned several times. And I think now we are seeing a certain level of moving on and breaking the wall of silence and moving through that wall to start at least holding them accountable at a certain level. And hopefully the world will move forward with us. Thank you.
I think I can take the question on universal jurisdiction. In my view, yes, definitely, that's an avenue to pursue. The thing is that you need a solid legal basis for that, for a domestic judge to work on solid ground. And don't you forget that the Geneva Conventions contain provisions on universal jurisdiction for grave breaches. Perhaps there is a window of opportunity there. One of the decisions that the General Assembly took with regard to the implementation of the advisory opinion of the ICJ is to call on the depositary of the Geneva Convention, the Swiss government, to convene a conference of the parties to the Fourth Geneva Convention. Preparations are underway. The conference will take place in April next year. Perhaps there is a window of opportunity there to discuss something about universal jurisdiction.
Thank you so much. I'm cognizant of time, but I would request everybody to kind of still respond to all the questions, but thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think Goldstone report needs to be mentioned every time I try to do it because exactly of what Hamdi said before. I mean, until 10, 15 years ago, it was even impossible to put Israel and crime in a same sentence. It was really, so that report broke a huge taboo, and for the first time was calling for very precise mechanisms to be activated. And as the ambassador reminded us, it was then not followed up properly, but there were a series of follow-up mechanisms established, including the Commission of Experts, that one of them was presided by Professor Tomuschat of Berlin, Humboldt University. They did great work, and we have, I think, to go back to those documents of 2009, 2010, 2011, because a lot has been already analyzed there in very good terms. Many things apply till today. And yes, to answer your question, I totally think that the impunity crisis, that was how that fact-finding mission, that report was putting it in the region, is fostering violence, has fostered violence. The lack of application of international law is one of the big components of this. Why we arrived to of course this incredibly unimaginable, horrible situation that we are facing today. So. Yes, I think at the time it was not maybe ripe yet, the international community to adopt that report, but we are seeing that was a block to arrive till today. And about universal jurisdiction, just one word, I just want to say that it has been at least 20 years that the Palestinian lawyers with lawyers from all around the world are trying to activate universal jurisdiction cases, some of them very solid, very well researched, in Spain, in the UK, in Argentina, in several other countries, in Germany. What the obstacles are normally not legal. They are political. There is quite a lot of discretion that national prosecutors enjoy in opening or non-opening investigations in universal jurisdiction cases, and unfortunately, in the case that we are talking about, this discretion normally is used to shut down or never open these investigations.
I'm going to quickly ask our speakers online to jump in also. So, Kenneth, responses and last word.
Okay, let me just answer the question regarding the basis for potential obstruction of justice charges against Trump, or, in the terms of the Rome Statute, interference with the administration of justice. And it's a simple answer. Article 70 of the Rome Statute describes that offense very clearly. And as for the jurisdictional basis, it's territorial jurisdiction. That is to say, we've already established that if a crime is committed on the territory of a state member, the government that commits that crime can be charged. A government that aids and abets that crime can be charged. And a government that obstructs the investigation or the prosecution of that crime can be charged. That's the simple answer.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ahmed?
Thank you very much. Maybe I'm not the expert in the legal aspect of these ones, but I feel really that we are going in the good direction. What I would say from our side, I feel that we will be, with time, be able more to have more influence on the legal aspects of this and to hold them accountable and responsible for all of this thing. And the other countries which support the occupation in this genocide should start feeling the fear of being responsible as well. But the other thing on our side, I think we need to have more of scientific and more of evidence of what's happening on the ground. And that's one important aspect, which I feel that we should put a lot of efforts in that aspect to get something which is scientifically based, approved, which can help you guys and just submitting something of a great value, which I think we should encourage everyone to work on this aspect, which has been not a priority for the last, let me say, like 14 months.
Thank you so much. Giulia?
So what can be done to rein in defiant states? First, I'd like to say that Just Security is mapping state reactions to the arrest warrants. And if you look at the map, really the defiant states are not so many. So that's the first good news. One is the United States, which is not even a state party to the Rome Statute. The French statement itself, I totally understand the frustration. But I think if you read it a second or third time, what it actually boils down to is we have conflicting obligations. It doesn't even say we will not arrest Netanyahu. So it's an unhelpful statement in that it seems to undermine France's support for the ICC, but actually it's maybe not as bad as it may look at first sight. Now, having said that, there are some defiant states, so I think it's the responsibility of the state parties to the Rome Statute to try, through diplomacy, to try and correct this position and call these states on their obligations under the Rome Statute. And finally, I want to draw your attention to the dispute settlement provisions in the Rome Statute. Under Article 119, if it comes down to a dispute between state parties on the interpretation or application of the statute, and if this question is not settled through negotiations, it can be referred to the Assembly of the State Parties that can itself make recommendation on how to settle the dispute or refer the question to the International Court of Justice.
Thank you. Hassan?
I think the speakers have wrapped up.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. In that case, then I think we have two clear expectations from all the discussions we've heard today. One from the court in terms of expanding the crimes included in the arrest warrants, the number of people that the arrest warrants have been issued for, and the geographical scope of these arrest warrants. And the second ask is then from third states to uphold their obligations not just towards the Rome Statute, but all the other international law norms that are applicable here, especially the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Conventions. And how everybody reacts to this is going to determine the credibility and the legitimacy of the court, but also of the larger international legal order at which Palestine is the heart of. So thank you so much this afternoon for joining us. My apologies for the slight delay in ending the conversation. Thank you to the speakers also for their excellent inputs this afternoon. Thank you.